is now hostage situations often carry psychological and social repercussions. What kind of support would you expect the hostages to be extended in this situation?
I'm delighted to join you today. To make a long story short, it was a very strange event which happened in Paris today. And I think it's a testament to the fact that people, not only journalists or commentators or national security experts, but people are nervous in France because the nation is in a state of malaise, to use a French word. In the end, it turned out to be a minor incident. So to make a long story short, the guy who was arrested apparently is a drug addict, and the four hostages, the four poor chaps who were taken hostages and freed by the French elite police shock troops an hour ago, they are employees of a restaurant, and that restaurant is owned by the hostage takers' own parents. So in the end, the whole story was a small drama, a tempest in a teapot, but it was interesting symbolically for 3 hours. The French media and the international media were fixated on what was happening because that street called Rue Ernest Renan is like a lower middle class street in the western suburb of Paris, like you said. And coincidentally, in that street are many Kurdish, Turkish, Lebanese, and Pakistani restaurants. It turns out that guy, the drug addict, hostage taker, has nothing to do with Turkey, Kurdistan, or Lebanon. But because we didn't know, and the police initially didn't know, people assumed the worst, and they assumed it may be a jihadist attack linked to the Middle Eastern situation. It turned out not to be the case.
Yes, I think you're right. The whole world's media were focused on it, thinking that it might be another terrorist situation in Paris. But if we look at the broader situation, then France's political discourse, the way that Arab communities are treated in France, when you have a situation like this and people don't know what is happening. We now know, of course, but when people don't know what's happening, what does that mean for communities like the Arab communities and the Pakistani and Lebanese communities, which you mentioned?
It's a great question. So what's interesting is what's in people's minds, perception. And the fact that everyone assumed the worst for 2 hours during that hostage situation tells you that people are tense. So I think it goes deeper than Middle Eastern or Muslim immigrant communities, many of whom are suffering some kind of, discrimination against them. Let's not forget that according to the latest opinion polls in France, 40 or 45% of French voters today, if elections were held this week, 45% of French voters would be tempted to vote for the ultra-nationalist far right, which also tells you a lot. So I think all these signals happening at the same time, they're part of a broader malaise. And I think that malaise, that discomfort or pessimism, it goes beyond, Lebanese, Kurdish, Pakistani migrants. I think it touches the whole French population because French has entered an era of economic, social, and cultural decline. And I think now the people are realizing that their country is declining for many reasons. And they look for scapegoats, sadly. So I think, it's a reflection of the broader tension, cultural tension, and social pessimism at work within French culture and society.
Well, we just have a couple of minutes left. You mentioned the far right and the polarization in France. Marine Le Pen, of course, someone who is doing better. She seems to have softened her offer to the public and tried to make herself look slightly more appealing. Could we see a situation in France where the far right become the most powerful political force?
The short answer is yes. And the short answer, it may happen within the next 11 months, because according to the French constitution, for the next 10, 11 months, it's complicated to have elections. But let's say by May, by September of 2025, we could have parliamentary elections in France, and the far right could have a big majority in the French parliament for many reasons. It's not necessarily because the far right is super smart and well organized. They're not. So they're not your kind of, smart populist, the kind of populism we see in countries like, for example, Italy or Hungary or even the US. They're not riding a big cultural wave. On the contrary, the far right in France is quite clumsy and disorganized. And their leaders, if you look at the CVs, at the resumes of their leaders, they're very unimpressive. Many of them are high school dropouts, etc. So it's not that much that the far right in France is brilliant. Then the other side, the French centrist, center-right, center-left political parties and leaders, chief amongst them Emmanuel Macron, have had such a lousy track record in the past 4 or 5 years that the French voters are almost like saying, okay, we've tried everything, center-left, centrist, center-right. Macron was a disaster. The only thing we have left maybe is the far right. It's that kind of vote.